Oklahoma Brownfields Conference from the Department of Environmental Quality. Conference Chair Lloyd Kirk.
Good morning, everybody. Well, thank you. I feel like I'm in the movies with that light. The lights are brighter today, but maybe it was last night. No, just kidding. But good morning and thank you. I think the reception was great last night. We had about 190 people at the reception last night across the street at the Petroleum Club, and everybody was there for a long past the 2-hour slot. I got to figure out how much we're going to pay for that. Patrick, where are you at? But anyway, I think everybody had a great time, and it was a great venue. So I'm glad everyone showed up. We have a great venue this morning, some more programs to go to. I want to thank again some of our sponsors, the signature sponsors, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, our exclusive speaker sponsor, the Tulsa Industrial Authority, and then our platinum sponsors, the Oklahoma City Brownfields Program, Chesapeake Energy, Crowell & Dunlevy, Intercon, Lochner, and Terracon. And today I'd like to thank Real World Management Solutions, Mary Jane's company, for the breakfast. She provided the breakfast this morning. So if you see her, give her a pat on the back. But this whole conference comes together, like I said before, because of a lot of planning. We're blessed with a lot of smart people at DEQ, a lot smarter than me, and we have a great planning committee that puts this together. The sponsorships come together pretty easy, and we can't do it without the money. We can't do that without the people and the planning, and basically they're leaders. I was asked yesterday by Robert Colangelo, what brings the success? Well, success is hard work. And because the quality of the program is the main thing. And Barbara Roush was the key behind that, and that's the meat and potatoes of this whole thing, is the education sessions. So I'm hoping you're getting a lot out of the sessions. But today we have Marianne Horinko that's going to be speaking, and I'd like first to represent. Joining us today is from the Director of Office of the Oklahoma Secretary of Environment. He serves as a policy advisor to Secretary Gary Scheer. Prior to working for the Secretary's office, he worked for U.S. Congressman Tom Cole as a field representative and agriculture advisor. Here to share remarks and introduce our keynote speaker this morning is Tyler Powell.
Well, good morning. I always like to say in politics, everything happens very quickly and very fast, and there's a lot of changes real quick, and that happened yesterday. My boss would be here, Gary Scheer, but he got tied up with an event with the governor this morning, and so you all get me. So hopefully it will be just as good as what he could do. When we look at what Brownfields have done, it is very good for Oklahoma. And in this office and with this current administration in the governor's office, we look a lot at economic development. We look a lot at what we can do to spur Oklahoma's economy. And the Brownfield program is one of those programs that not only balances environmental protection, but brings in the economic development. And it's something that is truly a crown jewel in this state. And so we do appreciate all the hard work that you all do. And so on behalf of Secretary Scheer and then also Governor Fallon, we really want to welcome you, and we want to go through and give you the charge and go out there and prosper and get out there and get things done so we can develop this state and develop the economy in this state. So I knew I was going to keep it short, so let's just get on to what you all are actually here for. So I have the pleasure of introducing the featured speaker, who is sponsored by Lochner. As president of the Horinko Group, her expertise is in watershed-based approach to cleanup and revitalization, corporate sustainability, and collaborative solutions to environmental progress through unique public-private partnerships and innovative use of environmental management system concepts. She has previously served as the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Solid Waste and Emergency Response at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and was Acting EPA Administrator. During the events of September 11th, she served as the EPA, assisting in environmental cleanup activities at Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. Capitol due to the anthrax contamination. In 2003, she oversaw EPA's response to the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster. As a result of these experiences, she crafted the groundbreaking national approach to response. She brought the new approaches to environmental protection using the partnerships, flexibility, and innovation to create environmental improvement. The Brownfields program signed into law by President Bush in 2002 is embodied of these new approaches. Under her leadership, the budget for the Brownfields program more than doubled. Here to talk about rethinking the future of Brownfields redevelopment, please welcome Marianne Horinko.
You all, and I'm going to do something a tiny bit different just because we've had a plethora of terrific speakers here yesterday and today, and because we've had so much useful information shared on the PowerPoints, I thought I would do something a little more interactive. I'm not very good with PowerPoint. In my experience, people read PowerPoint, and I have trouble cramming everything onto the page, and then it's very dense. And I'm also a huge student of body language. People can be disingenuous in their words, but it's very hard to lie with your body language. So you all think you're watching me, but I'm actually watching all of you. So with that, I'd like to put things in 3 buckets, and that's what I'll do today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Brownfields program, where we started, where we came from. I alluded to this yesterday, but I think it's fascinating. Many of us, like my dear friend Charlie Barch and Bob Colangelo, have lived through this. So it's good to look at our roots and see where we've come, especially in a state as rich with history as Oklahoma. And then I'd like to talk about where we've evolved in the 10 years since President Bush signed the Brownfields bill. And I don't by any means, although a little bit of me does, mean to claim pride of ownership. Brownfields, as I said, is not a partisan issue. It's a jobs issue, it's an environmental protection issue, it is an economic development issue. It is not a Republican or Democratic issue. My landlord today was the man who had my job in the Clinton administration, and I love him like a brother. And he gets all the credit in the world, he and his successor, Tim Fields, for growing the program that we started. So it truly is a partnership in the finest sense that you rarely see, certainly in Washington in these days. And then finally, after I talk about where we've come in 10 years, I get to the most exciting part, and that is where we're headed. And this is where all of you come in, because you stand here today really poised at the crossroads that Mayor Murphy spoke about. Where technology and education and generational changes, demographic trends, are reshaping the way we do business, both in the public and private sector. So this is where I'd love to hear what you all have to think, because I have as much to learn from all of you as you might possibly learn from me. So let's start with where we evolved from. As Charlie would attest, in the early 1990s, the 80s were really a sense of awareness. Companies, governments, academics were beginning to realize that there was actually something in the ground other than soil. There was water, and stuff was in it. And if we tried to take the stuff out of it, it was hideously expensive and darn near impossible. And furthermore, you couldn't just sell your property because the next guy might not want to buy it. He might want to look into it. And as companies began to realize especially that no matter what happened, it stuck to you like sticky glue, they realized once they got through the initial, oh my God, this isn't fair, it's unconstitutional, blah, 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 they realized that they were essentially in jail for life once something was contaminated. And frankly, Superfund put the fear of God in corporate America, and that was all to the good. And I, at the time, was practicing law in corporate America. But my boss, John Quarles, was prescient enough to realize that long about 1986, 87, that companies should stop whining and get about to settling with the government, drop the litigation for the most part, and start cleaning up and moving on. And he founded the Superfund Settlements Project. I was lucky enough to be right out of law school working for him on that project around that spirit of collaboration. And so the program in the late 80s, early 90s began to move. But then a series of court cases were handed down that all of a sudden raised awareness in the financial community. Lenders, developers, real estate brokers began saying, whoa, this contaminated property, it's going to stick to me like sticky glue too. I'm not sure I like that. That's not reflected in my pro forma. I didn't count that in when I signed my securities offering. This whole thing stinks. And so properties with contamination, or even the specter of contamination, began being redlined. And unfortunately, that's a lot of very valuable property. And with that also came times that were very much like the economic times of today. And that is high unemployment, very few jobs being created, depression. This is the whole Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid era. It was a time of recession. And I recall sitting in my boss's office in 1992, watching the riots in South Central Los Angeles with my dear friend Marjorie Buchholz. And as we watched that devastation unfold, we looked at each other and thought, surely there must be something that we can do to bring hope back to the blighted urban core. And so in those days, we didn't even have Windows. Those of you that are old enough to remember this, we had MS-DOS. And so I booted up my WordPerfect and created a 2-page document called the Urban Initiative. And the idea was that we would put our boss, EPA Administrator Bill Riley, and the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Jack Kemp, on a podium together that fall, which conveniently enough was also an election, and they would announce our joint program to create jobs and housing and revitalize the blighted urban core. So we took it up to Riley's Chief of Staff, Gordon Binder, and he loved the idea. And we went over to the HUD and met with the career staff, and they loved the idea. And so we began developing this initiative and tried to schedule it. And as the fall approached, it became clear to me personally that I should probably close out that document and start working on my resume, because it didn't look good for President Bush. But the career folks very smartly decided to pick the ball up and run with it. And so in 1993, when Elliot Laws was sworn in as the assistant administrator, they persuaded him to launch the first 3 Brownfields pilots: job training, cleanup, assessment, revitalization. They used Superfund site assessment money for this because that can be used for such purposes, and partnered with the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences on the job training. And the pilots were wildly successful and very politically popular. And I believe in 1994, EPA held its first ever National Brownfields Conference in Kansas City. 400 people attended. I sent my boss, Don Clay. By then we had started our own consulting firm together. And his reaction to coming back from this conference, I think, epitomizes the old school EPA view of the Brownfields program in those days. And mind you, Don had been a career bureaucrat who was named a political appointee just because the Oswald job after Redevelopment went to jail was so awful they couldn't find a political appointee to take it. And he came back from that conference and I said, how did it go? And he said, convention of pickpockets. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, all these people want to do is make money. And I said, Don, that's the point. And he said, well, I don't care about that. All I care about is the cleanup. And I said, Don, all I care about is the cleanup too, but why does it matter if these people make money? It's all to the good. Possibly we might make some money. There's a thought, bud, since we're now in the private sector. Out of that debate evolved the Brownfields Action Agenda, which had, I believe, 3 pillars to it. First, additional rounds of pilot projects all across the country, urban, rural, in partnership with the mayors and local governments. Second, policy changes to encourage lenders especially and developers to come in and embrace these properties. And then finally, but certainly not least importantly, partnerships, reaching out to other federal agencies such as the Department of Transportation, NOAA, the Department of Defense, and looking at ways that their agencies could leverage EPA's pretty meager dollars and conduct activities to encourage brownfields cleanup and redevelopment in their respective jurisdictional sectors. And so those, I'll quote some of the seminal policy changes that came out that really still resonate today. First of all, there were a series of reforms in the Superfund program to help remove the stigma of sites that EPA had no intention of doing anything about anyway. In the 1980s, the Superfund program created the surplus inventory. And this was, I believe, some 25,000 sites that EPA had done a preliminary assessment and site investigation upon and decided, really, these were not NPL caliber sites. And so those sites just sat there in electronic hell. And so when developers became savvy to the existence of this inventory, they would look up a piece of property, see it on the inventory, and say, no mas. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. And the EPA folks realized they were inadvertently stigmatizing thousands and thousands of properties. So they created the Surplus Archive. They took all of these no further action properties and removed them from the active surplus inventory and put them somewhere out of sight and out of mind. And with one fell swoop, they basically destigmatized a very large amount of valuable real estate in this country. Liability protection was also an important thing. EPA cashed out many de minimis parties so that single parties could proceed with the cleanup without worrying about settlement negotiations that dragged on forever with people that weren't going to give up much money anyway. They began signing prospective purchaser agreements that encouraged developers to come in, purchase, clean up, and redevelop the property without fear of being liable for contamination that occurred during a period of time that they had nothing to do with the property. And they began offering incentives for local governments to come in, take over properties, clean up and redevelop them, by giving municipal governments liability relief as well. Those reforms were tremendously popular, and as these sites began to move in commerce in the mid to late 1990s, the Brownfields gospel began spreading like a good infection to some of the other cleanup programs. So in 1997, the RCRA program, which deals with operating industrial sites, began to embrace the RCRA Brownfields Prevention Initiative, looking at ways that operating industrial facilities could encourage cleanup, hasten the cleanup, use economic development as a driver to push cleanup, engage communities in their vision for some of these properties as the deindustrialization of America began to hasten, and put these sites to productive use. So the clean parcel or parceling out determinations evolved, where, for example, if you had an old steel mill in Lackawanna, New York, some 1,600 acres, and at 1,598 of them, Region 2 had decided no further action, they could parcel out that vast piece and do a beautiful redevelopment along the banks of Lake Erie. And the 2 acres that still had a lot of contamination from the steel mill could proceed with the region's blessing through the state's voluntary cleanup program, which, like most state programs, is much more agile than the federal program. I ran the federal program, and I can tell you, it's ponderous. It's ponderous for a reason. You know, the federal government exists to be an anchor, and it's like a huge super tanker. You set a direction, and then every morning you come in and you turn the thing 5 degrees. You don't want the federal government to flip on a dime. But the closer you get to communities, the more agile government generally becomes. And so having the program really run out of communities, out of states, out of local governments, allowed the program to adapt to changing real estate conditions much more quickly. And EPA and the states learned that that's what the developers want. They want the ability to move in real time, not calendar years. They want certainty. They want to know what the process comprises. Even if they don't like the process, they'd rather have the known rather than the fear of the unknown. And so EPA and the states began to work with other partners to provide that certainty and that speed and that agility. And really, frankly, that's unheard of in the federal government. And then the last piece of this evolution was regulatory changes, improved standards for treating contaminated media. In the 1980s, unrealistically, we all thought that we were going to clean everything up to zero, or if not zero background. I still remember my boss being hammered by Senator Lautenberg for not cleaning up to MCLGs. And Don kept trying to explain, like the thoughtful chemical engineer he was, that you can't measure zero. But he still got beat up. Well, in the 1990s, we as a nation began deciding, perhaps it's not the smartest use of our limited resources to incinerate a whole lot of dirt. Perhaps we should have different treatment standards for contaminated soil and debris than we have for trichloroethylene that's coming right off the degreaser. And so, frankly, a fascinating case study in and of its own self was EPA and the state's policy grappling with standards for contaminated soil and groundwater in the 1990s. If you're a regulatory wonk like I am, it's almost an unintentional comedy to watch a proposal and then a withdrawal and then a partial proposal and then a partial withdrawal and then a lawsuit and then a partial proposal and then a policy guidance but it was well-meaning people trying to get their arms around a brand new concept. But that began to settle out in 1998 when EPA settled on the process for making determinations as to whether hazardous media needed to be treated like as generated waste or to be treated like dirt with some proximate contamination. And that also really streamlined the cleanup process and reduced regulatory uncertainty for the development community. The program began to really mature in the year 2000. Brownfields legislation had been kicking around for 9 years, but despite bipartisan support, it didn't go anywhere, primarily because it was linked to that dreadful concept, in my view, the Superfund tax. And I was there when the Superfund tax was reauthorized, the midnight reauthorization in 1991. That was a Republican doing. And we struck a deal with the Democrats on Capitol Hill simply because the program had been battered so badly. Don Clay used to say Superfund suffered from abused program syndrome. And he just wanted the program to have another 5 years of certainty so that it could settle down, do a thorough self-examination, and make some smart decisions. Stop piling sites onto the NPL, because you can list a site for a nickel. And that's what EPA did in the 1980s, 80, 100 sites a year piled on the NPL. But by 1990, the number that had been cleaned up was 6. I'm not making that up. And so Don and his successors, Elliott Laws and Tim Fields, decided very wisely, let's not focus on loading up the pipeline, let's focus on getting something accomplished. So this wave of listings in the 1980s became a wave of construction completes in the 1990s. And with that policy evolution and the other regulatory evolutions I just described, the program began to be widely recognized as a success, and Brownfields even more so as a success. And in 2000, the Brownfields program was awarded Harvard's Innovations in American Government Award, very prestigious award for a government agency, and the thought that EPA would receive that award was unthinkable 10 years previously. And in 2002, when I was back on EPA's watch, as I said, I watched President Bush actually sign the Small Business Liability Relief and Brownfields Revitalization Act. It's a mouthful because it contained legislation that institutionalized many of those policy innovations, but that legislation crystallized much of the regulatory flexibility and evolution that had occurred in the 1990s and recognized that broad momentum existed in the political world for these very good ideas. So where have we come in 10 years? That's a nice round number in which to examine how the program has matured. And I'm pleased to report that it has matured in very important respects. First of all, the law spurred even more growth and redevelopment. In 2002, I'm pleased to report that I actually participated in the announcement of EPA's Land Revitalization Initiative. I had the pleasure of driving up to Baltimore, since I'm a native Marylander, that was special for me, and stand on the cleared lot of what had been an Allied Stignal Chrome site that I actually worked on the first RCRA 3013 order when I was in private practice in 1988 with Sue Brahm of EPA, who now runs the NEPA program, and launched the RCRA facility investigation for that site. By 2002, it was done, save the groundwater. It's a beautiful site right on the Inner Harbor across from Camden Yards. Gorgeous vistas, not unlike the vistas that you all are creating here, very historic. And the site had been purchased or leased, I forget which, by an office developer who planned a big office building and pavilion and parks. But in the meantime, while they were doing the site prep work, Cirque du Soleil had leased the property, and they were launching a Cirque du Soleil performance in Baltimore that year. And it was a gorgeous sunny day. Then Mayor Martin O'Malley, now governor, really good guy, showed up. Tom Sansonetti, the Assistant Attorney General, my boss, Christy Whitman, Bob Ehrlich, the governor of Maryland. There are so many politicians on the stage assembled before the mass media that Christy Whitman, in front of the Cirque du Soleil tents, that Christy Whitman joked that we ought to play Send in the Clowns. And my staff said to me, Marianne, get up there. You know, this was your idea. Get up there and get in the picture. And I said, I have no desire. I am so happy to be here today on this gorgeous day, watching all of these other politicians want to be a part of this. That is reward enough for me. And so that began the concept that all of EPA's cleanup programs should incorporate these notions that cleanup, redevelopment, community engagement, working to think that maybe these aren't sites. These are properties in people's neighborhoods. And if we engage the community as to their vision for these properties, that will create real momentum to push the cleanup along. And it will also, more importantly, help empower citizens to make smart decisions. Because my experience has been that when you engage the community, they start taking a hard look as to what the people are doing at this property that they had been ignoring for a while. And they start saying, wait a second, I understand that you, EPA and the PRP, view this site as your little science project and perhaps as job security. But I live here, and I would like to see this little project come to an end, perhaps in my lifetime, perhaps next year. EPA listens to communities, as do local governments and states. And so the fact that now the underground storage tank program is taking a hard look at their sites and engaging in a partnership with Starbucks, the fact that the federal facilities program is saying, perhaps this valuable property, waterfront property at Hunters Point in San Francisco, should no longer be a naval base. The fact that the RCRA program is looking at ways to prevent future brownfields. That is all to the good. Also, the liability relief greatly improved, because what this brownfields law did was take these retail liability protections, these one-off prospective purchaser agreements, because I will tell you, having worked on these in my life, they're a great innovation, but they are resource intensive. The EPA is a great agency, and I've certainly been in the private sector in my life plenty too. But once you get a bunch of lawyers in a room and say, we need an agreement that essentially is like a prenup of every contingency that could happen once we enter into this sacred union, oh my God. You know, by the end of it, you wonder why people get married in the first place. But what the Brownfields law did was say, you know what, we're not going to do this one-off anymore. So I'm trying to think, what was there was some sort of crazy religious figure a long time ago that had like a wedding in a big stadium. And that's essentially what the Brownfields bill did. It said, you know what, wholesale. These are the legal rules. You do them, you get relief. Now, obviously, as we heard yesterday, that's not quite as clear-cut as we would like. I mean, lawyers are good and bad, and then the legal system is what it is, and we'll need to continuously evolve what's going on there because it seems to have gone somewhat awry in the Ashley case. But for the most part, while there are exceptions to every rule, the Brownfields legislation really codified and wholesaled what had been going on one-off during the 1990s. The other thing that occurred during the last 10 years was lots and lots of regulations and policy guidance. For example, the all-appropriate inquiry rule. That was probably the favorite rule that I ever worked on in any of my time, public and private sector at EPA. We convened a Federal Advisory Committee Act committee, a FACA committee, which essentially takes the pen somewhat out of EPA's hand for a period and turns it over to the people who care about this rule. And they convened for a process of about a year, open meetings for the most part, and negotiated what they thought that regulation would say. And it was a terrific process. My hat's off to David Lloyd's staff that worked on this rule. And at the end of the process, remarkably, everyone concurred, signed off on the rule. Public, private sector, NGO, academia. And after it was over, I got an alarmed fax from the head of the U.S. Public Interest Research Group, because he did not realize that his designee on this FACA had happily concurred on an evil Bush administration regulation. And he sent me a blistering letter saying, I hereby withdraw my concurrence. And the career folks in the Office of General Counsel happily wrote him back saying, I'm sorry, buddy. Doesn't work that way. Once you sign off, you sign off. But it was a great process, and I think really epitomizing the collaborative approach that the Brownfields program brings to things. And then, of course, financial assistance grew. Administrative procedures were put in place for the grants and the revolving loan funds, the tax incentives, approval processes for state programs. Unheard of for EPA. Normally, EPA has very rigid and prescriptive approval. Lloyd is wincing just listening to this, approval processes for state programs. EPA has what I like to call the sticky baton. They look the state up and down about 1 million times, and finally they say, okay, we're going to pass the baton. Not really. And this happens, and it's sort of like you would see a relay race at the Olympics where one guy grabs the baton and the other guy's, okay, we're going to run together now. And it's dreadfully inefficient. But Brownfields revolutionized that by saying, all right, here are some criteria, guidance really, for the states to take the program over, and we are not going to be authoritarian in the way we administer the program. And really, it empowered the states to pick up the ball and run with it. And then through the revolving loan fund, through the grant program, which had enormous political popularity on Capitol Hill, EPA handed money out to states and local governments and nonprofits and really grew the program and watched it pick up and gallop. And then the final piece that we've seen in the last 10 years, the most critical piece, is civic support and engagement. That has grown at a drastic pace. And in fact, most telling, I think, is this statistic. Last April, a little over a year ago, EPA held what is now an every 18-month event because it's become so huge that it's almost unmanageable. It's a Brownfields conference in Philadelphia. And in some of the most rough economic times that any of us have seen in our lifetimes, almost 7,000 people showed up to that conference because they view this issue as vitally important. And not just people like you and me, but people that still aren't quite sure what brownfields are, but they see the opportunity. So a program that was just sort of a glimmer in all of our eyes 20 years ago has become, mainstream, dare I say it. And you only have to walk around this beautiful city to see that evolution embodied. We're staying in a beautiful historic hotel that lay fallow for many decades because of asbestos contamination. Now it's just gorgeous. I've loved staying here. We went to dinner last night in the Brickyard area. Beautiful, quaint, very evocative of Oklahoma history and culture. And the possibilities are endless. And I was fortunate enough to have a tour of the beautiful Devon building that they're building, essentially a campus here in the heart of Oklahoma City. And it is an amazing building. I had my jaw open the entire time because as the daughter of a geologist, I was just fascinated at the gorgeous geology inside that building. And the design thought process that went into that building is amazing. It's breathtaking. And it goes way beyond anything having to do with Platinum LEED certified, although that's certainly a fine objective. But every office, every cubicle has natural light. The offices have entirely the same layout and furniture, from the CEO all the way to the average Joe. It is a very human, beautiful space. The building has a beautiful vibe. And that is in part due to the Brownfields ethic. So I think that Oklahoma City can rightfully take enormous pride in what you are accomplishing and really just beginning to accomplish here in the heartland. So most importantly, where are we going? This is where I'd love to hear your ideas. I'm going to throw some things out there, but then I'm wide open, so y'all be thinking about what you want to put on the table as well. I think the program now is evolving by exploring some new policy directions and partnership opportunities. Right here in Oklahoma City, you all are the beneficiary of EPA's new area-wide planning, which links brownfields to some of the other concepts that we spoke about yesterday. Energy, water, watershed-wide thinking across jurisdictional boundaries. This is revolutionary in the government. And frankly, for some big companies, it's revolutionary in the private sector bureaucracy as well. But it's a terrific policy evolution. Also, I think the traditional job training is transitioning into environmental workforce training, which I think is vitally important. If this country is to prosper, we need more young people picking science, technology, engineering, and math careers. Innovation is what made this country so great. That is an area in which we do differ greatly from other parts of the world, is that we embrace change. We run towards change in this country. And as the traditional manufacturing base of this country becomes more compact, to put it mildly, we need to really think outside the lines and look at how we can pioneer new approaches, not just to brownfields cleanup, but also to healthcare, to IT, to the way we drive, walk, think, work together. Technology innovation is our future in this country, and the Brownfields program is embracing that by becoming not just cleanup job training, but environmental workforce training, and I think that is all to the good for all of us. Because leveraging resources across the government, not just in the environmental sector, provides all of us sort of with the tools and the skills that we need to serve multiple sectors: agriculture, transportation, energy, you name it. Some of the other new approaches and opportunities you've heard alluded here. One is green remediation. I think that is a valuable concept because groundwater is the land of unintended consequences. After we mandated the MTBE additive. We discovered MTBE in states where there weren't even MTBE mandates. I see that happening with ethanol now. All of these ethanol mandates seemed right-headed at the time, but no one checked with the underground storage tank program to see if ethanol corrodes underground storage tanks, which it does. And so we're going to have another generation of leaking underground storage tank cleanups because we didn't think about the unintended consequences. Green remediation aims to take on that notion by saying, when we select a remedy for our cleanup sites, let's not just look at how we're attacking the contamination, let's look at what our remedy is doing from a broader perspective. For example, I've got a PCB cleanup in Wisconsin, and I've selected a remedy where we're going to dredge all of that stuff out, dewater it, and then truck it 400 miles. So we are going to create a ton of climate consequences and truck these PCBs into a community that isn't that excited about owning them, when perhaps we could vitrify them and use them for a roadbed. So green remediation is all about saying, let's look at the life cycle of our remedy, not just what we're doing to pluck TCE out of the groundwater, but what we're doing in the community with this remedy, and think maybe there's a smarter, more low-impact way to do cleanup here that the community might even possibly like better, and God knows, maybe we could actually save some money. So that is a very interesting evolution that's being embraced now worldwide, pioneered by EPA Region 3. They're doing great, great work. Urban agriculture is an interesting concept. You tend to think about rural brownfields in areas like Oklahoma City, but there is absolutely no reason why a pocket park in Washington, D.C. couldn't be an urban agriculture location too. Phytoremediation is a valuable idea. It's a great idea. In fact, Dow Chemical has pioneered a technology called Deep Well, where they are growing trees that actually have, essentially growing into cased wells that normally you would inject groundwater. Instead, the roots penetrate down and suck contamination out of the groundwater using the tree. And so one of Michelle Obama's, First Lady Obama's initiatives is quite famously encouraging kids to get involved in community agriculture in urban areas, and brownfields are ideal for this. And so urban agriculture is an area that we frankly never thought about before, outside of EPA's usual wheelhouse, but it presents an interesting opportunity. You know, obviously it needs to be studied, needs to be done properly, but I think, you know, in addition to creating parks and ball fields and golf courses, urban agriculture is a fine policy evolution for the Brownfields program. A third area that we spoke a whole lot about yesterday, so I'm not going to do more than touch on today, is clean energy. These sites, because of their prior industrial activities, are ideally located to the grid. And EPA and DOE's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, are partnering on a number of these sites, and we heard yesterday about some of the really exciting work that they're doing, and I think that is only going to grow because petroleum prices, there's still pressure, although they're damping down a little bit. I was a little depressed to see how cheap gas is here because it's $4.50 a gallon where I live. But, you know, we're not going to site new nuclear plants tomorrow. We're not going to site new wind turbines tomorrow. Solar is going to take a while to get financing. So, you know, we need to push all of these things and look at opportunities to do some exciting work. And even hydropower, I think that we need to work with the Army Corps and look at some of the aging locks and dams in this country. That infrastructure needs to be rehabilitated. Why can't we retrofit it for hydro? The answer is a word that I hate to utter: bureaucracy. We've always done it this way. Huge missed opportunity. So the next 10 years, I think, are going to be fascinating simply because I think the Brownfields program is actually an interesting model for the direction that not just environmental protection, but also general policy evolution is going to take in this country. Traditionally, we approached environmental law, and frankly, a lot of law, as a very top-down approach. Command and control. We order, you follow. And if we don't like what you're doing, we're going to come in and tisk, tisk, tisk. Brownfields is completely the opposite of that. Brownfields is a groundswell program. It grew in the field. It started with the pilot projects. It didn't start at headquarters. It was a groundswell effort in communities all across America. And eventually, the success of this bottoms-up program created momentum such that folks in Washington said, you know, maybe we ought to catch up to these people because we're about to get overrun by them. And so it's a different model. one ideally suited for this technology age, where information is very flat, where we're all empowered. You know, we don't regulate in traditional ways anymore. We regulate by social media. You know, we don't, while EPA is worried about TSCA reform and Europe is worried about REACH, in the meantime, I'll pick up my Kindle and say, boy, what's going into baby bottles? Maybe I shouldn't buy those for my kid. Or, is that arsenic in juice boxes? Huh. You know, this is lightning speed. Governments are racing to catch up with the power of information and the power of people. And that is the model that led to the success of the Brownfields program. The other pieces that I think are moving forward are the fact that this is a market-based program. Notwithstanding Don's comment about the convention of pickpockets, the free market is driving this environmental ethos. No one is making people do this. No one made you all show up here today. As I observe everyone's body language, I can see you're all voting with your feet. No one's walked in or out of the door. Why? Because while money is certainly not fundamental to our value system, it certainly is the lubricant that makes it friction-free. And having this be market-based means we're not dragging people in this room and putting electronic monitors, forcing them to sit here. You're sitting here because it's a damn good idea and you can sell this to people, whether it's your boss at Oklahoma DEQ or your boss at Devon Energy. And that free market-based approach is not a partisan issue, it's a pocketbook issue. And the other piece of this that I think is really forward-thinking is that it is collaborative. It is not combative, for the most part, notwithstanding the Ashley case. When you compare the lone outlier of the Ashley case and its brethren to the monster tidal wave of litigation that I participated in myself in the 1980s, and you know, frankly, I paid my law school debt. But it's a waste of time, complete waste of time, arguing over. I remember going to PRP meetings in Chicago at a site in Illinois where Westinghouse was one of the PRPs, whatever they are now, GE. And their entire allocation of 25% of the liability was one piece of paper with the Westinghouse logo on it that had written on it 100,000. No units, all it had on it was 100,000. And based upon that, the steering committee had decided to allocate them 25% of the liability, because that was obviously 100,000 drums. And it was hard to argue one way or the other there. But it was ridiculous. I mean, every PRP meeting, every month, the lawyer for GE would make Xerox copies of that paper and pass it around just to remind us of how unfair that was. And of course, the other piece would be, really, you know, was it lunch? But we're not combative now. We realize that while it may feel good to take a few whacks, at the end of the day, it's not constructive. We have to be collaborative and look out for our fellows if we're going to make something happen. I read something interesting recently. Humans are one of the few species, besides termites, bees, and ants, that put the good of the community ahead of the good of the individual. Most species on this planet is, you know, famously dog eat dog. And we can be that way occasionally when we're not looking to our higher natures. But as a whole, much like bees in a hive, we've got worker bees, we've got ones that collect pollen, we've got ones that take care of the queen, we've got ones that actually give their life to protect the colony and go out and sting people when the colony is threatened. And I think that's the model that the Brownfields program has taken, where we look out for the good of the larger community. You know, occasionally we need a lawyer to go out and sting someone, but for the most part, we're gathering pollen, we're making honey, we're taking care of the queen. I love that concept. And working for a higher social order. So I think that is really an unusual model for both government and the private sector to take, particularly in a free market model. And I really applaud that approach. So I think the 10 next years are sure to embody sort of the spirit of collaborative partnerships and free market environmentalism that are the hallmarks of the program's innovation. I'll close with the thought that in this political climate, it's never easy to be EPA anyway, as I said yesterday. But in a presidential election cycle, it's particularly a pill to be EPA, because we're just so easy to pick on. And you know, we're the environmental job killers. We need to be the environmental solutions agency, not the environmental problem agency. But the beauty of Brownfields is that it demonstrates through action that sustainability is not a job killer. Sustainability is something that creates jobs, creates education, creates opportunity in this country, and creates wonderful opportunities like this for all of us to get together, network, learn from each other, and do some good in the world. So I will close with the notion that, very old school. I was born in Boston. I grew up in Washington. We moved there when I was 8. But my grandfather, my Italian grandfather, came here from Italy when he was 20. He is a tile setter. And when I was a kid, my dad would drive us around Boston. During the Great Depression, my grandfather used to drive all up and down the East Coast and set tiles in buildings such as this. He was really an artisan, a craftsman. And so my dad would take me around to some of the buildings where he had set tile and point to his works of art and say, Marianne, look at your grandfather's beautiful work. So I encourage you, when you leave this building today, to walk around Oklahoma City and look at the Brownfields projects that you all are working on, because someday I plan to take my daughter back to Oklahoma City and say, Caitlin, look at Mommy's beautiful work. So thank you all very much, and I will be happy to answer questions, hear ideas. Well, the two things that come to mind to me after having spent 2 full days here, and this is not my first time in Oklahoma City, I've been here many times in my life. In fact, some of you know, I actually started my Brownfields career in Bartlesville at Phillips Petroleum. I'll shorten this because some of you have heard this, but I had just been kicked out by the Clinton administration, was starting my second business, and Phillips called me up. They are headquartered in Bartlesville, and they hadn't been paying attention to what was going on in Bartlesville and Superfund because they're not liable there. They didn't contribute to any contamination. But they were somewhat distressed to wake up in the morning and read in the Federal Register that their corporate headquarters was going to be a Superfund site. They called me up and said, is there anything you can do? And I said, no. Never in my history has a site been proposed for the Superfund NPL and not gone final. And they said, please help us out here. And I said, as long as you know it's not going to happen, I'm happy to take your money. And so I flew out to Bartlesville, charming community, and recognizing properly that EPA is never going to listen to some big corporation. Oh, this is going to cost us money. Oh, really? So we met with the community. We met with a very vibrant faith community in Bartlesville. We met with the local Chamber of Commerce, met with some of the local real estate agencies, and had some dialogue about what the NPL entailed. And they had been told, of course, that huge tranches of money were going to come into Bartlesville to clean up this old smelter site. And they didn't realize what was going to happen to the real estate and to the jobs in Bartlesville as a result of being a toxic waste site. And oh, by the way, all that lead was probably not going to be cleaned up by tomorrow. And so I also had the great asset of Steve Largent and J.C. Watts being in the congressional delegation, so I could have sold tickets to those meetings. But EPA Region 6 wisely realized that, this might not be a popular thing to do since the community is more concerned, as one minister famously said, about the lead in the bullets than the lead in the soil in Bartlesville. And so they commandeered my dear friends at Oklahoma DEQ to do the first ever state deferral pilot. And that site never went on the NPL, and it was cleaned up. So Oklahoma really is a lead in doing brownfields innovation. As I walk around Oklahoma City, especially going to the Thunder game on Monday night was a very powerful experience because just the passion in the community here around that sports team. And obviously, full disclosure, I'm a huge basketball fan, but I'm not a huge pro basketball fan because I think that these guys are just showing up for the money. But that was not the case Monday night. I mean, those kids were just wailing on each other because they wanted to win so badly. And the amount of community spirit around that team was unbelievable. I've been to NCAA playoff games that weren't that hard played. So being here for a couple of days, one thing that probably shouldn't have surprised me, but really did, and I think the Devon building is sort of a hallmark of this, is that there's extraordinary beauty and design here in Oklahoma City. The place, the Chesapeake reception last night in a gorgeous Art Deco building. I love Art Deco. And there's a lot of beautiful Art Deco, and a lot of what Devon has done in a very modern and sustainable way is really Art Deco too. I love the Nautilus pattern in the lobby when you look down. And sort of it's a very tactile building. You don't usually walk around buildings just wanting to sort of touch everything, but I did. I mean, the tour took probably twice as long as it should have because I was stopping to sort of touch all the rock. So I think that design sensibility that you all have in Oklahoma City is a real opportunity to create a center for the arts. I think the Oklahoma Rising video sort of epitomized some of the real cultural iconic things in Oklahoma City. I don't know if you all give yourselves enough credit for this, but I think this could really be a vital tourism center. I mean, when I saw the Oklahoma Rising video, the first thing I thought about doing is we have a Jeep, like a Wrangler, and I thought, I'm gonna throw Caitlin and Louie in the Jeep and drive out here and hike around. It's gorgeous, and there's so much rich history in Oklahoma, and I don't stop to take a look at it. Now, I may be a little bit jaded because I live in Washington, and I haven't ever been to anything in Washington except places I've had to testify. But, you tend to think, well, I'm going to get up and fly out to the Grand Canyon. But a real opportunity for you all is sort of the history and tourism opportunities here in Oklahoma, not just in this country, but really from all over the world. There's the saying that, whom do you see in national parks? People on snowmobiles, 60-year-olds, and Japanese tourists. Well, in a way, Oklahoma is sort of a national park for some of the cowboy history in our country. And I think that is a huge opportunity for all of you. And Oklahoma City could be sort of a ground central of that, using some of the rail and the other assets that you have around here to sort of lure people to the tremendous natural beauty here in Oklahoma. And the last piece is the education piece. It's interesting to me, in the couple of days I've been here, almost the first thing that all the Okies say to each other, where did you go to school? It seems to be a real badge of honor. And we heard from Mayor Murphy that education, and as I said myself, we need kids to pick these careers. I've been telling folks only half jokingly that we have more Oklahomans in Pennsylvania and Ohio right now than y'all have here in Oklahoma. But you're creating jobs with your fabulous educational system, and they're valuable science, technology, engineering, and math jobs. One of the most enjoyable things for me at the reception last night was, talking to a ton of young people that were very passionate about their work as geologists or engineers or environmental scientists. So I think all of those are huge opportunities for Oklahoma City going forward. And, given the lay of the landscape I've witnessed with the Brownfields opportunities here, I think y'all are well on your way. No? Well, if not, thank you all very much for having me out here, and I look forward to coming back again and seeing the good work that you've done.
Marianne, thank you so much. Thank you for your thoughts about the future of Brownfield redevelopment, and also your thoughts about the beginning of it. And I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else out here learned a lot. It's just been an honor and privilege to visit with you, and I hope you had a great time in our great state. And I was talking to her last night when she talks about degrees, and she's a chemical engineer, then had law school at Georgetown. The only other person I know is a chemical engineer and attorney is Mary Ellen. And yeah, I know. And I go, so once, and we were talking about this, she goes, it's a paradigm. You're trained as a scientist for a solution, and you're trained as an attorney to argue, So you're arguing the solution, so that was a paradigm. And so now I can better understand Mary Ellen. But no, it was a joy. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. And Marianne, thanks again. Following our break, we're going to have a break here. We have two sessions this morning at 9:45 and 11, and there's a break in between that. And please go by and see the exhibitors. These sessions we have this morning, like this next round, I wouldn't know which session to go to. You're picking creative financing, you're looking at different ones, you're going, which one do I go to? We have some great sessions this morning. And that was the goal of our education subcommittee, was to make it so tough when you look at them, I can't figure out which one I want to go to, because we really have great speakers. One thing that my event planner made note of, on our bus tour this afternoon, Our bus was full, and we had a lot of people that wanted to go, and we only have one bus, but we have over, about, I think, 60 people added on the tour. If you're not going for some reason, and if you can give the ticket back to the registration desk so she can find out and get a head count. But that's a good problem to have when we fill the bus and we want more people to go on the tour. Now, at noon today, when we do reconvene back in here, Larry Nichols will be speaking. So I know you have a session from 11 to 12, but try to get in here as promptly as you can, and we'll be starting to eat and then and hear Larry speak. So have a good session.